All right, everyone. Happy pre-Purim coming up. This is the class. Today was Zion Adar. We're getting deep into the Purim. Moshe Rabbeinu's passing and birthday were both today. Happy birthday, Moshe. And we are waiting for your return. Be'ezrat Hashem, the coming of Mashiach, may it be now. As we discussed the year of Tchias HaMesim, it would be really nice if Moshe Rabbeinu is up there right in the beginning. Okay. So today we have an exciting Purim class, deep class. I want to share with you a deep thought from the Rebbe, from the Lubavitcher Rebbe on Purim. But I think this thought and this idea that we're going to share today very much is giving us insight into the expected miracles. We might just have witnessed this year, with God's help, one of the most incredible Purims of all time, maybe the biggest Purim ever, even bigger than the first Purim. As we know that there's a lot of tension in the Middle East around Persia, Iran, and this dark evil that has been menacing the world since 1979, I think, and been threatening a Holocaust, God forbid, on the Jewish people in Israel, is very close to being eliminated. Goodbye forever and ever and ever. Let us hope. I'm not a prophet. I don't know, but it looks good. The timing seems to be perfectly right, and let us see what's going to happen. Okay, but what I really do want to talk about is the nature of how this miracle seems to be going down, in that this is being conducted by the United States of America, leading the charge to dismantle the Islamic regime in Iran that has murdered its own people, 32,000 people, as they say. Again, that's the numbers that are coming out, and that has been responsible for so much blood. And so the fact that this evil is being removed by the president of the United States, and as we understand, that not too many presidents would have done what might happen over the next week. Let us bless the president to be able to make the godly decisions. Let us bless the world that there shouldn't be much innocent blood, or any innocent blood. Only the wicked should be destroyed and no one else. The whole thing should go down with incredible hatzlacha and success, and the world should be liberated from evil. And only goodness and light should prevail. And this seems to be the last darkness that has to be removed as the oncoming of Mashiach. So this is really interesting and exciting. Now, one of the major principles that we discussed in our Mashiach updates of the year, and it's related to the concept of this year being 86, because 86 is the name of God most associated with nature. So the uniqueness of this year is the sublimation of nature, which is really the whole story of Purim. Purim was not it was a miracle. It was a spectacular miracle, but it was the sublimation of nature. The natural forces in the world turned out to be completely directed and orchestrated for the favor of the Jewish people and for the favor to bring about the great godly miraculous deliverance of the Jewish people. And yet nothing extraordinary happened. Everything was normal. It was the sequence, it was the whole tapestry of events coming together in such a magnificent way, which you see clearly was the hand of God. And what that means is, as we're going to see soon, it's the elevation of nature. It's the refinement of nature. That's the ultimate of the uplifting of the name of Elohim, which belongs to this year. So I will make the argument, and I think it's very, very clear, that without the biggest miracles, we would not have the president that's now in the White House being the president. It does not make any sense. It does not make any sense. And it does not make any sense. He had zero chances still in 2015, 2016. It was absolute zero that he would be president. He was a laughing stock. People looked at him as a buffoon. He was up against, I think, 16 contenders who were big, important people in the Republican Party, each of them with accolades, each of them with a whole resume, and they all suddenly just crumbled before him. It didn't make any sense whatsoever, and he took and became president against all odds, and they fought him, cats and dogs. They fought him like crazy. Whoever saw such a war to take down one person, with the Russian story, with this story, with impeachment, with everything, every egg you can throw at the person's face, they threw at him. I'm not talking about whether innocent, guilty on his end. It's all not irrelevant. The fact is that everything was done to not allow to, first of all, take him away from his first presidency, to knock him down and tie his hands, literally while he was president. And then finally, when they took him out of office, and then all that was done to the point where they even had him in a mugshot, and they dragged him through the floor in court cases in New York with every type of thing against him, throwing mud at him nonstop, all the way to an assassination attempt that came so close to taking his life without God's miracles, but he split second, literally, you can see it's a miracle on television. That was like that was just absolutely stunning. Is clearly, but it's all nature. It's all, he turned his head. It wasn't like suddenly, an angel came down from heaven and pushed the bullet. It's what happened, but moved his head. But again, everything is just natural, all nature. And now he's the president, and he might make a decision that will end evil forever. May God bless that decision making. So what I'm really saying is, it's not him. It's God vested in this world. God leading the way for the ultimate redemption. And it's all happening, and it's going down in Purim time, because this is the essence of Purim. And that's the reason why Purim and Mashiach are such buddies. We know that the sages say that even if all the holidays are canceled at the time of Mashiach, Purim will remain. Because one of the reasons because Purim and Mashiach are buddies. They go hand in hand. So it should not be a shock that the great grand finale leading to the final act of Mashiach, when the fall of Persia, in the hands of Edom, is happening as we're coming into Purim. So again, I don't know. I'm not a prophet, so I can't tell you what's going to happen this week or next week, but it's not going to surprise us all if we wake up to a new world very, very soon. And again, our prayers are for the safety of everybody. Safety of our brethren in Israel, safety for all good people in Iran and in Persia, the Jewish people that are there, and all good Gentiles that are there, the safety of American soldiers and all other soldiers around the world, safety of the entire world, which is what we're praying for. But on the other hand, what is evil must go for Mashiach to come. And it seems like we are right there. Okay, so to understand this, this is all following the theme of the winter Mashiach. It all has to do with the purification of earth itself. As we discussed, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, listen up to the classes called Mashiach Updates, in which we discussed 9, 10, 11 classes about the internal essence of the evolving Mashiach world that is coming about, that is emerging. Okay. So to get a better understanding of this, let's take a deep dive into a fascinating talk from the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, in Likutei Sichos. This is in volume 15 of Likutei Sichos, the first talk on Purim. Over there he brings a whole Talmudic discussion regarding the establishment of Purim. So he's going to bring three statements regarding how Purim was established. Purim was established as a holiday after the great event that happened, the great miracle of Purim. It was established as a holiday. I think it was established a year later to the first anniversary. How was it established? It was petitioned either by Esther or by Esther and Mordechai, the great players of Purim, as we will see. It came about, as we shall see, through 3 requests or 3 petitions. And they were all granted, and as a result of that, those requests granted by the Jewish official Sanhedrin, which at those times were also known as the Anshe Knesset Hagdola, the men of the Great Assembly, as they established it, Purim then became one of the great Jewish holidays celebrated with great fanfare and joy and happiness until today. Okay, so let's take a dive into that. So there's first of all, in the Talmud Masechtes Megillah, that's on page 7, Tractate Megillah, page 7, on the first side of the page. The Talmud says like this: Sholchalem Esther, Esther sent to the rabbis. She sent a request to the Jewish Supreme Court. The Chachamim, to the wise men, to the Sanhedrin, to the great court. Kav'uni ledoros. Establish me, meaning my miracle. The miracle, she was the one, she was the grand player of the miracle. She interceded, she risked her life to intercede by Achashverosh. She brought about the deliverance and the miracle. It came through her. So she said, my miracle, I want you to establish it for generations. Rashi explains what that means. That, what does it mean? Establish me. Her words are establish me. It means give me a name. Etch me into the chronicles of the Jewish people. I want to be in history. Make this a historical remembrance for Israel. For my name, Rashi says, how? For a holiday, and to be read, that the story of the Megillah, the story of Purim should be read, so that I will have a name. It will eternalize me. Okay? That's one statement of the Talmud. Then the Talmud continues, and I think it's on the same page. And the Talmud says that Esther makes seemingly another request. In other words, she didn't want to push it all in one shot. I guess she was tiptoeing. She would get one thing she had in mind right away, I think. She was a little sneaky, Esther. She's sneaky. She works the way she works with Achashverosh and Haman, that she takes it easy. She pushes as far as she can. So with the sages, she does the same shtick. Okay? I like that shtick, but she does it. She gets in. She's get a foot in the door. So she continues and she asks for another request. What's her next request? She says, perhaps you can actually write me down as well. Kasvino l'dayres, which that means put me into scripture. So the first request wasn't that she was asking that she should be one of the books of scripture. They should read the story of Purim. Like you read it, they can open up a letter and read it. You don't have to have a book in the Torah. You realize Esther is one of the holy books of the Torah. It's one of the books of the Ksuvim. It's one of our 5 Megillot, 5 scrolls that are part of Ksuvim, part of the writings, part of the Tanakh. And Esther is one of them. This was her request, that they should enter her story to be written as part of Scripture. Now, this is in addition to establishing the holiday and to reading, because even if you would read it, not necessarily, you could read it by heart. The main thing is it should be read, the story should be told. It doesn't have to be written doesn't have to be written in a scroll. However, once she asked that it should be part of Scripture, that changes already the reading as well, that you have to read it from a kosher Megillah. It has to be written on parchment, and you have to read it. You're not allowed to tell the story by heart. You have to read it inside with all the details. So these were Esther's requests. And it wasn't so easy. She got a little pushback. There was a back and forth. In the end, she saw it through, and both her requests were granted. Okay? That's what it says in the Talmud, in the Babylonian Talmud. In the Jerusalem Talmud, it relates a little bit of a different story. Okay? And what we're going to do is we try to analyze it. In the Jerusalem Talmud, it says that Mordechai and Esther, Kasvu Igeres, they sent a letter. So Mordechai sits down together with Esther, and they write a letter. And they sent to the teachers. Who are they? These are the great rabbis of the Sanhedrin. This is what they said to them. Are you accepting upon yourself these 2 days? What do we mean 2 days? Because we know Purim is 2 days. One is the regular Purim, the Purim that is kept by Jews most of the world. And then there are the special Purim, Shushan Purim, which was a special Purim for the city of Shushan where the miracle happened. And in all cities that are walled cities from the time of Joshua, when the Jews went into Israel, all those cities like Jerusalem and places like that they have the next day Purim, the 15th day of Adar is when they commemorate Purim. So the Mordechai and Esther wrote a letter and asked the rabbis, can you establish us as a holiday, the festival of Purim, these 2 days? All right, and then the sages agreed and they granted it. So what is the difference between the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud. Now, by the way, what's the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud is? The Babylonian Talmud was compiled by rabbis studying the Mishnah about 100 years after the Jerusalem Talmud. See, there were two main centers of Torah study. One was in Israel, and one was in Babylonia. So the Babylonian Talmud was compiled from the great scholars living in Babylonia, and it was completed over 100 or 150 years after the Jerusalem Talmud. The main Talmud that people study today and is more like the foundation of Jewish practice and halacha is the Babylonian Talmud. There is also a Jerusalem Talmud. Okay. So when you're done the Babylonian Talmud, it's good to learn the Jerusalem Talmud, and you become a real big scholar, which I am very far from. But in any case, when you take a look at the two Talmuds, they both seem to be saying that the whole story of Purim was established through a request from the Purim heroes. The difference, however, it is the Babylonian Talmud only mentions Esther as the requester, as the one who's petitioning. The Jerusalem Talmud says the petition came from Mordechai and Esther. So is it an argument? Are we going to say, no, the Jerusalem Talmud had a tradition that it was Mordechai and Esther that asked the question, and the Babylonian Talmud had a tradition that it was only Esther that had the question? Then there's a general principle in Torah. If we can reconcile contradictions, we reconcile instead of saying there's an argument. Whenever we can say, this was talking about one thing and this is talking about something else, we do that. So therefore, in a case like this, if we do a careful analysis of the reading of the words in the Jerusalem Talmud versus what it says in the Babylonian Talmud, we will see that it's not a contradiction, because it's hard to say it's a contradiction, especially if they're arguing not about a law, how one should behave, but they're arguing about a fact. They're arguing about a story of something that happened. So if you say it's an argument, then one would be correct and one would not be correct. And so therefore, we don't want to do that. We want to say both are correct. So how can we say both are correct? We have to read the words stated more carefully. So the Rebbe says, if you read the words more carefully of Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud, you'll see that they're talking about two different things. And that is, in the words of the Jerusalem Talmud, it says that the Mordechai and Esther asked, what did they ask? Are you accepting these 2 days? In other words, they were requesting a festival of Purim. They weren't requesting a reading of a Megillah. They definitely weren't requesting a writing and an addition to scripture. What they were asking was just an establishment of a holiday. How would you have the holiday? Well, there are many things we do on the holiday that are not reading the Megillah. First of all, we have a feast, and we're supposed to sing and dance and get a little tipsy. And in addition to that, there is also the sending of gifts that we do to each other, and also the gifts to the poor. So these are all things that could be included in the festival of Purim, which was requested by Mordechai and Esther together. That's what the Jerusalem Talmud is talking about. The Babylonian Talmud is addressing something else. In addition to the request that came from Mordechai and Esther together for the establishment of the festival of Purim, Esther herself requested another two requests, which we mentioned earlier. Number one, she requested the reading of the Megillah, which is one of course, the highlights of Purim. We read it actually twice, once in the Purim evening, Purim night, and once Purim by day. So that was a request coming solely from Esther. Mordechai did not participate in that request. Second request was, as we said earlier, that Esther was requesting that her story should be inscribed in Scripture, which is an even stronger request on her part. As we said earlier, we could have had a recitation, a reading, but it wouldn't have been a reading with all the laws of reading. It wouldn't have a scriptural element to it. And that would have been her request number one. But then she pushed the envelope further to ask for it to be written as a Megillah, and this becomes one of the 24 holy books, Megillah's Esther. And again, both were granted. And now we've reconciled. No argument. When it comes to the festival, the Jerusalem Talmud is saying both asked. When it comes to the reading of the Megillah and the writing down of the Megillah, it was a request only of Esther, like it says in the Babylonian Talmud. And to support that, if you read where the Jerusalem Talmud and the Talmud Bavli get this, so the Rebbe says, careful reading of the Megillah, you will see it says it clearly in the Megillah. When you look in the Megillah, meaning you look in the way the Megillah, which is the story of Purim, is written, recorded in the actual scroll, you'll see nuances, you pay attention, and you can see that this was a request of Mordechai and Esther, and this is a request only of Esther. Let me show you where. When the Megillah says, this is in Megillah's Esther, chapter 9, verse 31, Perek Tes, Pasuk Lamed Aleph. It says, Lekayim es yemei hapurim ha'ela. It says to establish the days of Purim. In the Megillah, it says itself that the Jewish people accepted to establish Purim as a holiday. Over there, the verse says, listen to the continuation of the verse, Kasher kiyam aleim, like it was established upon them, by who? Mordechai HaYehudi, the Jew Mordechai HaYehudi, the Esther HaMalka, and Queen Esther. Okay? It says clearly, the establishment of the holiday of Purim was based on the establishment of both Mordechai and Esther. So that's the source for the Jerusalem Talmud, saying that Mordechai and Esther were the ones who requested it together. They sent a joint letter, but it was approved by the High Court. They gave it the seal of approval, and it was established as a holiday. Fine. Then the Megillah continues. Where is this? In this chapter 9, Perek Tes, verse 32. Again, before it says, the next verse, see, that was 31, now this is 32. What does it say? Then it says, listen to these words, Umaymar Esther Kiyem, and the statement of Esther was established. What? Divrei HaPurim ha'ele, the words of this Purim. V'nichtav b'sefer, and it was written in a book. So here you see it clearly. The next verse, it only mentions Esther. Mordechai is dropped. Mordechai is not there because this was Esther alone. What does it say? Two things. It says Divrei HaPurim Ela. Simply Divrei can mean the matters of Purim. But you can also read it Divrei, comes in with Devarim, words. So that would be referring to the reading of the words, the relating of the story. That was request number one of Esther. And it came from Esther alone. Divrei HaPurim ha'ela, the words of Esther. And then it says, what's the last? V'nichtav b'sefer. It was written in a book. Ooh, that's the second request of Esther. Only from Esther. What did she ask? She should be inscribed in a scroll. Kavald. Perfect. We reconciled the Bavli and the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, no argument. They're all seeing it in the Megillah. Very good. We had three requests, and the Sanhedrin, the great Sanhedrin, stamped their approval 3 times. Request number 1, Mordechai and Esther. Then Esther comes and adds more to her request, and another request, and boom, boom, they're all approved. But what we need to understand is the question, because we understand what's the logic behind it. What is the reason why Mordechai only participated in the first request? The first request to establish Purim, Mordechai was on board. It seems like that when Esther says, hey, Mordechai, let's ask for something else. Mordechai, oh, I'm not asking. Why is Mordechai not participating in the second request? She has such a great idea. They should read. She tells Mordechai, let's have everybody read it. It'll be so exciting. Everybody will come on, and we'll have such a good, it'll be amazing. And Mordechai says, no. If you want a Christ, you do that on your own. I'm not with you on that. Why? Why is Mordechai not joining on the reading request? And why couldn't Mordechai why would it bother Mordechai if we have another book in Scripture? Such a nice, beautiful book. Everybody loves the book of Esther. It's one of the favorite books. So yet Mordechai did not join in that request. Those two requests came from Esther alone. We need to understand. To make the question even stronger, we know that the Anshe Knesset Agdola, the great men of the assembly, who were then part of the great Jewish head, great supreme lawmaking body, the great Sanhedrin, Mordechai was one of the Sanhedrin. So that means that when he was sitting in Congress, in the Sanhedrin, and Esther came and Esther brought her petitions, Mordechai was one of those who added his approval. He voted, and he voted for it. If that's the case, if he himself votes for it, so why wasn't he part of the petitioning for it? You know what it is? It's always in Congress. I'm going to use American law. Congressmen, there's always, each one is a sponsor of a certain, the congressman or a senator, he sponsors a certain, I don't know what they call it, a law, a petition, or whatever they call it. And then everybody votes. And he can also participate in the voting. He's one of the votes, but he's a sponsor of this amendment or this law or whatever it is. So in the same was in the Sanhedrin. Mordechai, he's not participating in the request, but yet he joins with the Sanhedrin and gives the approval. So we need to understand the reasoning for that. So what really over here is what's coming out of it is like this. One of the elements of Purim, which is the festival of Purim to be established, it's a joint request by Mordechai and Esther. Then there's another two requests. The reading of the Megillah and the writing of the Megillah. Both of these are only requested by Esther, not by Mordechai. But yet Mordechai goes along with it and he adds his approval with the Sanhedrin to the request. So what could be the reason that he's not asking, but he approves of it? Therefore, let's follow the Rebbe's kind of reasoning. This is Gaval. Even before we get into the whole understanding of it, but the Rebbe is already leading us into the way we have to think. So the Rebbe says we have to say that Mordechai himself Mordechai is what would be a good word for it? Mordechai is operating on two levels. Mordechai is operating on a level for himself as he sees things from his own level, from where he's at. And then there's Mordechai as part of the Sanhedrin. There's two Mordechais over here. It's almost like there is Mordechai and Esther. There is Mordechai as Mordechai is alone. And there's Mordechai as Mordechai is part of the Sanhedrin. And we will have to say like this. When Mordechai is considering things by himself, sitting in his own office, as a great rabbi, as a great scholar, as a great leader of the Jewish people through one of the most dangerous times of Jewish history, leading them to a triumphant victory. From that place, there is no room in Mordechai's mind for reading the Megillah and writing the Megillah. It doesn't occur to him. And not only occur to him, he doesn't want to participate in it. It's not his business. I mean, of course, he kept Purim, Mordechai, but it's not his thing. But then there is Mordechai, as Mordechai sits as part of the court. When Mordechai sits as part of the Sanhedrin, although he's not the sponsor of the request, he still goes along with it and he approves it. So we need to understand why. All right, good question. Now, to add to that, one more gewaldige nuance, one more awesome little thing to understand. Why is it that the Jerusalem Talmud doesn't talk at all about the writing of the Megillah and the reading of the Megillah and the writing of the Megillah? That request. The Jerusalem Talmud only talks about the establishment of the festival. The Babylonian Talmud doesn't speak about the establishment of the holiday that the Jerusalem Talmud speaks of, but only speaks about Esther's requests. In other words, it almost seems like the Jerusalem Talmud those rabbis and those sages are very Mordechai oriented. And therefore, they're not talking about Esther's request. They're very, they're more masculine. We will actually see that that's the explanation. The Babylonian sages have a feminine touch to them. And that's the reason why they're not even talking about Mordechai's request together with Esther. They're only focusing on Esther's request for the Megillah to be read and the Megillah to be written. And that's what the Babylonian Talmud speaks of. So what does that mean? What's the difference between the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud? To understand all of this, let's get right to the crux of it. Deep idea, beautiful idea, but simple. The Rebbe says when we take a look at the role that Esther played and the role that Mordechai played, we see that they both, the miracle of Purim came about through the joint efforts of these two heroes, Mordechai and Esther. Actually, there's different opinions. According to some opinion, Mordechai was the stepdad, and Esther was just raised by him. According to another opinion, they were actually married, Mordechai and Esther. So they're a couple. And the way each one's piece, each one's role in the great deliverance of Purim is in a different arena. What's the difference? Mordechai is primarily preoccupied with the spiritual elements of the decree. There's a vicious decree. There is a serious decree of a gray cloud or a black cloud hovering over the Jewish people, which was serious business. It actually says it was sealed in heaven. That's why it says Mordechai rent his garments, and because he says he had an encounter with Elijah the prophet. They revealed to Mordechai everything. What did they reveal to Mordechai? What's happening in heaven? In heaven, there's a concept the Talmud tells us that when decrees are made, it can be written with tit. When a negative decree, with tit means with like cement or like a seal with earth, plaster, or it can be sealed with blood. Once it's sealed with blood, no one can do anything about it. It brings to this frightening realization of the Holocaust that we know that there were great tzaddikim who knew that this dark cloud was hovering over the Jewish people. And I'm sure they did whatever they can, and they probably came up against this decree written in blood, and there was nothing to do. Nothing to do. God, where we don't understand why, we will not understand only after Mashiach comes. But that's when something is sealed in blood. Nothing to do. When something is still a stage before that, it was sealed, but it was sealed. It was sealed with plaster, means it can still be fixed. And that's why Mordechai went in. He saw it and he knew it, and he went into overdrive. But he knew that that Haman, that wicked Amalek Haman, and his co-conspirator Achashverosh, who was also a big anti-Semite, King Achashverosh. That's the great miracle, that even an anti-Semitic Achashverosh had a change of heart and became a benevolent and became kind and an assistant to the Jewish people. That's the part of the amazing thing of Purim. It was it was a complete conversion. God changed the human being, changed the ruler of the world, the great monarch, the great king that was then the most powerful ruler. Hashem literally changed his heart from darkness to light. But at this time, he was a wicked monster. Him and Haman together schemed together to annihilate men, women, and children. It would be a horrific bloodbath, the likes that the world has never seen. An entire race completely slaughtered. That was the plan. But Mordechai knew that that's not the power. They have zero power. They can even give one scratch to one person. The reason why it was dangerous was because God approved it. In heaven, they had because the Jews had sinned. And the Talmud discusses what those sins are, what's not for them now. Mordechai knew that the only way to fix it is to annul that decree. And how is he going to annul that decree? Is to get the Jewish people to repentance. And that was his primary work. It says Mordechai gathered the Jewish people and he decreed a fast for 3 days and 3 nights. Although it was Esther's idea, but Mordechai was the one who executed it. And he gathered all the children and he was studying Torah with them. And it says the mothers came and they were begging. The children were fasting, little kids, and they were learning. When Mordechai, it says 22,000 children Mordechai had with him, pleading. And it says that was what evoked God's mercy. God said, what's the sound of the sheep that I hear? The sound of the Jewish children studying and praying. And this was all Mordechai's work. So Mordechai brought the hearts of the Jewish people back to God. So to say, in other words, Mordechai's effect was spiritually on the Jewish people. Esther, on the other hand, was the one who took care of business down here below. She was the one who walked into the lion's den, into the palace, uninvited, at a time when anybody that would walk in, as we know, uninvited, is risking their life immediately. They can behead that person instantly. I don't know if they were into beheading over there, but they were definitely into hanging. It could have happened just like that. She risked her life. She was the one who made these parties where she invited Achashverosh, she invited Haman to her feasts and her parties, and she was pulling the strings down here below to bring about the change within the realm of nature, within the physical aspects. Now, obviously, all that Esther did, no matter how pretty she is and how much favor and how beautiful and how much she's able to capture the king's heart, it would have been utterly useless and meaningless had the decree in heaven not been removed. If God was insistent, God forbid, and stubborn that the Jews must be killed, nothing that Esther could have done would have changed it. She would have come to Achashverosh. She said she would have a Jew, and in 1 second he would have thrown her. He would have thrown her into the ghetto together with the Jewish people and slaughtered her with everybody else. And by the way, that could have been the ending of the story. By the way, you follow the story. He hated Jews. She suddenly says she's Jewish. He could have said, "You're Jewish. I hate you. How dare you deceive me?" He could have, in 1 second, dragged her out of the palace, thrown her into as we said earlier, into the ghetto, closed the door, and finished. And the next days, when the Cossacks would come and the mob would come with clubs and swords to kill everybody, she would have been murdered with everyone else. Could have happened. Why didn't it happen? Because God gave her favor in the eyes of Achashverosh, and suddenly his heart melted from her. And everything she asked, he did instantly, even killing his best friend. Why? Because God decided so. So, of course, Mordechai's work, and why did God decide so? Because there was no reason anymore for the decree, because the Jews repented. So, in other words, Mordechai is working upstairs and Esther is working downstairs. That's the way it is. Or, let's reframe it. We'll reframe it not only regarding the means of how they brought about the deliverance, but also the effects. What's the real story of Purim from Mordechai's perspective and from Esther's perspective? How are they seeing Purim? Mordechai is celebrating. Once the miracle of Purim happened, you know what Mordechai is celebrating? Mordechai is celebrating the Jewish people's hearts are so holy and so godly now. We know that one of the things that happened on Purim was that the Jews completed their acceptance of the Torah, which they had already done 1,000 years earlier, but it was shaky. It wasn't such a complete acceptance because it was under duress. As the Talmud tells us, that God held a mountain over their head and said, "Take the Torah or I shoot you all, or I'm dropping the mountain." So therefore, even though we took the Torah, it was not exactly, and Chassidus explains it wasn't God saying, "I'm going to shoot you." It was more like God was overwhelming us with his love and we couldn't say no. But it wasn't really a free choice. It wasn't completely our choice. But in the time of Purim, because the miracle happened, or even before the miracle happened, but whatever it was, this great, dark, threatening, looming threat sparked the heart of the Jewish people and brought out the best in them. And they cried out to God, "We love you, we love your Torah, and we want to serve you forever and ever." To Mordechai, that's the story of Purim. The Jews are connected to God. He delivered his people back into a relationship with God. To Esther, to Queen Esther, she's excited. She saved the Jewish people from a Holocaust. She's happy that the Jewish people are alive physically. They were at the brink of death. So she was working more on the physical side of things, and her role that she played was more in the down to earth, and her commemoration of the miracle is also her celebration of the miracle is the physical side of things. This is Mordechai and this is Esther. Now we'll understand also the difference of how they approach the difference of how they approach and this has to do, by the way, with the concept of man and woman in the first place, because as we discussed many times, men represent, the masculinity represents energy, and femininity is related to vessel. There is oil, there is light. In Kabbalistic terminology, there's a concept called light and vessels. Or in simple words, neshama and guf, soul and body. So it says in the Zohar that Abraham and Sarah, Abraham is the soul and Sarah is the body. And you can't have one without the other. And the purpose, and in a sense, the purpose of everything is the body, not even the soul. That's why, from the ultimate perspective of God, it's the body and it's the woman that will be the ultimate. In the time of Mashiach, the body will be higher than the soul. So women will be higher than the men. And everything, but this is the idea. So now we can understand this all fits into this story, why Esther is working things out in the more physical, concrete reality, and Mordechai is hovering in the realm of the soul. And we'll add to that some more spice. It's really worth it learning the Sikha, because the talk I'm doing really in a abridged version. In the talk, it's elaborated on, and it's very, very beautiful. I'm just going to add, the Rebbe adds some gewaldige Kabbalistic ideas based on Kabbalah, where it says that Mordechai's energy of his neshama is from the divine attribute of chachma, of wisdom. His soul was a conduit of the chachma element, the wisdom of the divine, the first of the 10 Sefirot, and he's it's not important for today's talk. But because the Rebbe mentions it, I am going to mention it. In Eitz Chaim from Arizal, it says that Mordechai is the Yesod element, the Yesod of Abba. What that means is, it's the power of Chachma, but the ability to transmit Chachma energy to the Jewish people, to transmit it downward. Yesod, the Yesod element of every Sphira, is the ability of, Yesod is bonding. Yesod also represents the reproductive element in a human being, through which one bonds either physically, spiritually with another person. So in that case, Mordechai's soul source is from the Yesod element of Chachma, which means he transmits the experience of Chachma. Chachma is the ultimate, the highest, purest level of spirituality is Chachma. Because Chachma is the ultimate refinement of pure abnegation to God. That's wisdom. Koach ma, the power of being utterly nullified, utterly abnegated to your source. Total opposite of the physical. Physical is dense, thick. Physicality is something. It's substance. The spiritual is tuned into its source. The more spiritual, the higher the level of spirituality, the more one feels the source and not self. The highest level of spirituality possible is Chachma. Chachma is the first recipient of God, and therefore it is completely nullified to its source. Mordechai, so therefore, if you had to say, what is the essence of a neshama, of a soul? What's the essence of a soul? What's the nucleus of a soul? The Chachma of the neshama. The soul of this, even though a soul has all the Sefirot in it, but the real soul of the soul is the Chachma of the soul, the wisdom of the soul. Mordechai's ability is to pour that energy down to every person, to channel that light, to awaken in every person their neshama of the neshama, which brings a person to total nullification to God. And that's why he was the one who led the greatest tshuva movement ever in history, to lift the Jewish people up with a collective, with a national tshuva, and they're all completely surrendering themselves to God with total self-abnegation. If that's the case, so he represents the epitome of spirit. Esther, Kabbalistically, is associated with Malchus. Malchus is the last of the 10 Sfirot. Malchus is the total opposite of Chachma. Malchus is pure vessel. Let's put it this way. Both Chachma and Malchus have a light and a vessel. All the Sfirot have lights and vessels. In Chachma, the vessels are so pure that the vessels are not even considered vessels. They're part of the light. In Malchus, the vessels are so strong that the light, even the light, is not even considered light. Malchus doesn't have any light. Leslama, she doesn't even have light. Her entire being is just vessel. She receives illumination from the highest Sfirot, but her essence is vessel, container, substance. Malchus is the world. Malchus is the source of creation. Malchus' kingship is creation. Malchus is speech. Speech is made up of letters, words, substance. So these two people are wired completely different. Mordechai is wired with the epitome of spirituality, of soul. It doesn't, to him, the body and the physical world and everything down here is irrelevant. To him, the fact that he sees neshama, he sees soul, and all he wants to see is soul. All he cares about is soul. Esther cares about how things are down here. She needs it to be good in the physical. She needs the world to operate in a correct way, the physical world to be a nice place. She needs the body to feel good. She needs our bodies to be healthy. She needs the world, the material world, to be in a godly state. So when it comes to the miracle of Purim, we'll now understand also when they're requesting for it to be established as a holiday, these are two different requests coming from two different places. You see? The first request was, let's establish the holiday of Purim. To establish the holiday of Purim, let's think about that. What are we going to do? We're going to turn it into a festival. On the one hand, the festival is very physical because the festival is feasting and having a good time. It's also physical because you're giving baskets of goodies to each other, called Mishlayach Manos. It's also physical because you have to give money to the poor. These are all very physical mitzvot. But let's think about it in terms of commemorating the miracle. What would be the point? You're commemorating, by doing these actions, you're commemorating the event that you want the people to remember the miracle. But if you're doing it exactly like we just explained, without reading the Megillah and without writing the story down, the commemoration is reaching where? The actual remembrance of the miracle is happening where? It's happening in the consciousness, in the thought process of people. When you are having a feast and you are delivering and we're sharing gifts with each other and we're giving gifts to the poor and it's a festive spirit, everybody is then thinking, why are we doing all of this? Because it's Purim. But where is the story of Purim happening in which realm is that story taking place? It's meant. You're doing physical mitzvahs, but the physical mitzvot that you're doing are meant to create a memory, a consciousness. And consciousness is taking place in the soul. So you want everybody to know, to remember the story, but the remembrance is happening in the soul. It's not happening in the body. The causes that are causing the consciousness is happening in the body. But the actual consciousness itself, the story of what happened, is commemorated in thought. Thought is the soul. Well, that's why Mordechai participates, because that's his realm. Esther is a participant as well, because you have to, it's by first establishing it spiritually, that just like in the story itself, Esther also tells Mordechai to go do the spiritual work. So she's part of that, because if you're not going to if it's not established in the spiritual, it can't be brought down into the physical. So Esther is part of that, but Mordechai, that's sufficient. He doesn't need anything further. To him, we've already accomplished. Once we have that, we've accomplished. Esther says, no. The actual story of Purim, the actual event, the entire story cannot remain a memory in the consciousness of people's thoughts. It needs to descend into the world of language. It needs to go into words. So her request is, let's have everybody tell the story. Speech, to relate the story. So what is she doing it? She's bringing it from thought to speech. And now we understand why she didn't do it in one shot. She should have just said, let's write it down. No, she asked it in 2 shots, because we know there are 3 worlds. There's a world of thought called Olam Habriya. There's a world of speech, which is called Olam HaYetzira, the world of formation. And then there was a world of Asiya, the world of action. So to bring something down, she wasn't just asking. She was channeling the story of Purim down through the worlds to come down, to be etched, Mordechai was sufficient when he brought the story, the light of Purim down into the upper sphere of the world of thought. That was made Mordechai happy, because it's enough that everybody can consciously experience it. Esther says, no. We got to relate. We got to tell the story with our speech to bring it down closer to our reality. And then she says, no, not enough. We have to put it on a parchment. The actual story needs to be written down with ink on a paper. And then the story becomes real in the physical world. It's not just you have actions you do in the physical world that stir an excitement in your consciousness. The actual story of Purim lands on a parchment. It's now captured in physical space in this world. The story of Purim is the story of Purim is part of the fabric of the material world, because there are Megillas that are written not just on Purim. All year long, I have a Megillah sitting in my china closet, right? The Megillah, and it's occupying physical space in this world, is occupied by this miracle of Purim. That's bringing it down into this world, writing the story. It's almost like carving it into nature itself, into the physical element of the world. That is the Esther part of the story. Esther does that because Esther is vessels. She's Kalim. To her, the physical world matters. To Mordechai, if the story of Purim is floating in the air, it's also good. So, but that's Mordechai when Mordechai is sitting by himself. Which means when he's sitting by himself, he's a leader of the Jewish people, and he's taking care of the Jewish people, but he is operating from his lofty state. And when he looks at the Jewish people, he also sees their souls. He doesn't see their bodies. I can see the Lubavitcher Rebbe talking about this, because as a leader of the Jewish people, he also experienced these Mordechai moments where he can look at the Jewish people and just see their pure souls. And he can say, listen, the lights of Purim are reaching their souls, and I'm happy. It's inspiring them. That's good enough. But then Mordechai also joins the Sanhedrin. He joins the high court. When Mordechai joins the high court, what's the point of a court? The point of a court is to direct the lives of people, how to live their lives where? In day-to-day living. The Torah can be pretty much theoretical. Until 2 people have an argument about a cow. And then and where do they go? They have to bring their argument to the Beis Din. And the Beis Din is going to look at the Torah, but also look at the story that happened and apply the Torah to the reality. So the Sanhedrin's job, as being part of the Sanhedrin, is to ground the Torah down here into daily physical living in this world. It forces the judges to look at the people not just from their soul, but to look at them also with it forces the judges it forces the judges to see the people as they are physically in this world and deal with them that way. And that's the reason why when Mordechai sits in the Sanhedrin, he can hear Esther's request and he approves it for writing it, for speaking it, for relating the story, for writing it down. It makes sense to him now because he's sitting in the Sanhedrin. But when the moment Mordechai leaves the Sanhedrin and he goes back to his holy room full of holy books, his soul soars up to such a high place. And he and with the Jewish people, because he's the leader of the Jewish people, but he's suddenly looking at them, their souls in heaven singing to God. That's all he sees of the Jewish people. So it's enough to inspire them on that lofty place. So like the two Mordechais, Mordechai above and Mordechai below. Now, the Talmud tells us wait a second. So this will also understand why the difference between why the first part was discussed in the Jerusalem Talmud, the festival that Mordechai and Esther request was in the Jerusalem Talmud, and the request for reading the Megillah and writing the Megillah is in the Babylonian Talmud. It's explained in many places, and we've discussed it in the past in classes. The difference between the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud is that the Jerusalem Talmud is on the level of soul. It's on the level of light. It was written in Jerusalem, a holy city. It's not written in exile. It's written in the holy city of Jerusalem. It was written 100 years before. At the concluding, it wasn't literally the second temple was already destroyed, but there was still leftover light from the temple era. We haven't yet gone to exile. There was still leftover presence of the divine presence still hovering over the Jewish people. There was much more light in our soul. That's why if you take a look, if you learn Jerusalem Talmud, you see there is much less debate, questions, and back and forth discussion in the Jerusalem Talmud. There is discussion, but usually in the Jerusalem Talmud, they come to clarity after 4 or 5 lines of discussion, 10 lines of discussion. In the Babylonian Talmud, you have 3 pages of back and forth of arguments on the same subject. So it's explained the reason why. When the light, if the lights are on, if you walk into a room and you need to get a book, and maybe let's say it's not so light, but it's a dimly lit room, but at least you have some light. You look around, you figure out there's the bookshelf. You look, it might be a little dark, so you have to squint a little, go to the bookshelf, find your book. You need to finish Mishnah for somebody, so you have to find the right one. It's not so dark. You're trying to get your phone with the flashlight. You can't find your phone. It's a little dark. You maybe take out 1 or 2 accidentally, but you're pulling out Mishnayos. Why you're pulling out Mishnayos? Because you know this is the Mishnah, because you can see the light is on. You might not know exactly, so you might have to pull out a few books until you figure out which is the one. But you get to it pretty fast. But then you walk into a room, it's pitch black. So you don't even know where you are in the room. So you have to start feeling around. And you suddenly feel something, you say, oh, I think this is the bookshelf. No, this is the table. Then you move around and you say, oh, you feel something else. And you say, this is the bookshelf. No, this is something else. And so on and so forth. You have to negate. This is not it. This is until finally you find what you're looking for. Because you're feeling around in the dark. The Babylonian Talmud are the Jewish people living in a dark time spiritually, and the rabbis that were discussing God's will were feeling around in the dark. However, do you know that the law is like the Babylonian Talmud whenever there's an argument between the Jerusalem Talmud? Because when you work things out from the bottom up, when you have questions and answers and you refute it this way and that way, you come to a certain clarity. You can come to a certain clarity in the dark even more than you have in the light, because you had to like come to it from within, from deep within your own mind, within your own logic. So there's a certain sharpness that won't arise. It's like you make someone work hard for something, they usually get a better grip on it than if you give it to them as a gift to begin with, as we all know. So the Babylonian Talmud has that quality. Now we'll also, now it makes sense like this. The Jerusalem Talmud, since it's a Talmud of light, it's a Talmud of or, of light, it's a Talmud of neshama. So therefore it looks at the story of Purim more from Mordechai's world. As I said before, a masculine approach, a spiritual approach. So it doesn't even talk about Esther's request. It just talks about Mordechai's request about the holiday of Purim, which, as we said earlier, is mainly to create the consciousness of Purim in the soul. The Babylonian Talmud is looking at it from Esther's perspective. The Babylonian Talmud feels the world, feels the nature, feels the reality, the concrete reality of our bodies and of the world that we're living in. And knows that we need to bring the light into the darkness. We need to refine the world. That's coming through Esther and Esther's work. So through reading the Megillah every year. And what's the story of reading the Megillah we're doing when you're reading the Megillah? You're reading a story of the natural world, of nature, and you're discovering God in nature. That's what the story of the Megillah is. And when we hear the story of the Megillah, we're supposed to not just hear that story, we're supposed to look at what's happening today in 5786, in 2026, and open our eyes and see that these events that are coming across and happening right now are not just events that are happening because of this and because of that. And give all kinds of interpretations of why the trends of people that are voting like this are voting like, no. God is spinning the world exactly the way he wants. But it's all coming in, it's with the participation of nature. Nature is cooperating with God. Everything is running, and it's revealing it. Which leads us to the last and final thought that which I want to swing back to what we opened up with, the miracle of Purim 5786, to the miracle of Purim in the year 3405. The sages say that Esther, the sages say like this. There is a psalm in Psalm 22, which refers to Lam Natseach, for the conductor. King David, with prophetic vision, wrote a psalm for the time of the story of Purim, which happened many, many years after King David, about 500 years later. So he's already envisioning the story of Purim. And he says, Lam Natseach, for the conductor, Alayela Tashachar. On the doe, I think Ayelet is a female deer, Hashachar of the morning. So the sages say that's referring to the Queen Esther and the story of Purim. Why is she called Ayelet Hashachar? She's called the female deer, the morning deer, is because just like Shachar, Seif Kol Halayla is the end of the entire night. What is Shachar? Shachar is the real pre-dawn darkness, which then gives into light, and the dawn suddenly breaks open and it becomes light. So just like that period is the end of the night, so too Esther is the end of all the miracles. Soif Kol Hanisim, it's the end of the miraculous period. So the Talmud asks, and I'm going to ask a few questions on that in a moment. The Talmud says, wait, hold it. Esther is the last miracle? What's with Hanukkah? Hanukkah is also a miracle. So the Talmud says, Esther is the last miracle that was allowed to be written down. Knows that we wrote it into scripture. Hanukkah, the story, it's written, we know the story of Hanukkah, it's written in the Talmud, but it's not written as part of scripture. So the last of the miracles that are recorded in scripture is Esther. And that's the reason why she is called Shachar, because she's the end of the night. So the first bomb question is the Marsha asked the question. we're talking about the end of a period of miracles. Why are we calling it the night period? It's not the night period, it's the day period. Shachar is the end of the night. If you're talking about this is the end of a golden era of miracles. So why would you call it the end of the night? It's the end of the day. It's maybe you should refer to her time as sunset, not sunrise, not dawn, dusk. Esther is dusk. She's the end of a day period. From Moses until Esther, from Moshe Rabbeinu, there's miracles. And then we've lost that light. Why Shach? How do you call it Laila? It doesn't make any sense. The other thing is that it seems that what makes Esther unique in this perspective that we're calling her Shachar, it's because her miracle was written down. Just because it was written down, that's the why she deserves to be called Shachar, the end of the miracles? Okay, no, the miracle of Chanukah is also a miracle, so it wasn't written down. It seems to imply that the writing itself is related to her being called Shachar. But the answer is so beautiful, the Rebbe says. And it's so powerful to us today because we see it happening. We see exactly this happening. The reason why the period of miracles is called the period of night, not the period of day, is because you have to realize what's the point of a miracle. The point of a miracle is to display God in a dark world. Miracles are meant to give us a glimpse of the higher reality. Nature creates a dark night. Nature creates a godless deception. Nature is a godless deception. Because of the predictability and the systems of nature, it seems like things are just running their course because that's just the way a system works. Because we see miracles from time to time, what does the miracle do? Peels away the clouds, moves away, and the sun is shining, the sun being over here God. We get a glimpse of God. So the point of a miracle is to bring divine revelation into a dark place. But there's two types of miracles. There are miracles in which the night parts, darkness parts, and a miracle, and the miracle drops down. What do I mean? What do I mean by that? Nature moves away for God's will, like the splitting of the sea, like the plague of the firstborn, like frogs popping out of everywhere. Just when Moshe Rabbeinu says it should happen, boom. All the miracles that happen on the time of the exit, like manna falling from heaven, and all these things. These are pure godly revelation, and nature was shut down. The natural world is nowhere to be seen. So then, even though a minute ago it was dark, it was night, but the day did not fix the night. The daylight, the godliness did not fix the night. The godliness chased the night away. The miracle chases nature away. But then there's a different kind of miracle, which is even a greater miracle and a more important miracle. And that is where nature makes sure to keep the night in place. The miracle makes sure to keep the night in place. It slips in overtly. Overtly or covertly? Which word it means hidden? Covertly? Yeah, it slips in covertly, and it does its thing, concealed and camouflaged in nature itself. And while it's happening, you don't even realize something extraordinary is taking place. And then suddenly you realize, hey, well, how did that happen? You realize, hey, yeah, it happened because such a thing. But a bunch of series of what would seem to be coincidences, but the fact that they came together in such a magnificent pattern to produce a certain result, and you realize that God's fingerprints is all over the place. He's literally meddling with everything, but he didn't destroy anything. You know what that does? That polishes nature itself. Polishes the nature itself, that we start to, nature starts becoming, first from being completely opaque, starts to become translucent, and eventually becomes completely transparent to God. It's the purification of nature. And it's explained, we're not going to get into it, the Rebbe talks about it in the talk over here, that it comes from a much higher place in God, such a miracle. But it's a more powerful miracle because it has the patience, and it has the delicacy, the delicateness to be able to tiptoe in quietly and do what it needs to do in nature, through nature. And its ultimate purpose is the uplifting of nature to make the natural world itself godly. That's the idea of the period of, that's why we say like this. The period of miracles, in the sense that the Talmud is talking about over here, it's the night, but it's the fixing of the night. It's coming to fix the world. There's two levels in that. In the earlier days, when the world was not ready for refinement, the miracles crashed the system. When a miracle happened, the system was broke, and it was needed. Because if in the beginning, nature, the natural world, meaning the concealments of God, were so stubborn that you had to first give it a few good smashes in order for it to weaken it. Once the klipa, the unholiness, was weakened, now treating the world to a greater godly treatment, where the miracle and nature can marry each other. One doesn't have to overpower; they can work hand in hand, and that's what we mean. The end of the night, sof kol halayla, the end of the night. The end of the night means the purpose of the night. The purpose of this miraculous, of the purpose of all these, of the entire biblical era, was to do a job on this world to make the world more refined to God. Then came the concealment, and there was a dark period of thousands of years when things need to get done. But still, whatever happened in biblical times to fix the world happened. And the conclusion of it was the story of Purim. Because the story of Purim was the ultimate miracle, the grand finale of all miracles. What's its job? To take the nature itself, the vessels, to polish the vessels, to refine the world, to make a country, the politics of a country, driven by all kinds of personal, selfish motives, be an instrument for the divine will, completely, and reveal itself, and be revealed. Not that it's always that way, but it's for it to be visible, like we see in the story of Purim. That's Sof Kol Hanisa. And that's the reason we illustrate that by the fact that her miracle was written down. What was the point of writing? What did we learn earlier? The point of writing down is to bring the godly story of Purim into nature, into the physical, onto a parchment made out of an animal, as we said earlier, to make it part of time and space of this world. The Hanukkah story didn't have that anymore. Hanukkah's story was primarily actually affecting the spiritual side of the Jewish people, not so much the physical world. The refinement of nature, forever. It happened on Purim and was enough. It didn't have to happen again, because that refinement, Megillas Esther, that we can reveal the godliness that's in the hidden. Once it was done in Purim, it's already for us. Every single one of us can discover it wherever in all aspects of our life. You can look at the world, even when you're living in a world seems to be shrouded by nature, and see the divine hand. Because the story of Purim happened then, and that's already enough refinement for us to be able to live in that reality. And now we'll understand, Gewalt, why it's also called Ayelas HaShachar. Shachar. Shachar has two meanings. Shachar has two meanings. Shachar means morning. Dawn is called Shachar. Like we daven Shacharit, Shacharis, morning. Shachar also means Shachar. Shachar means black. So we know, how do we reconcile? It's two opposites in one word. Shachar means dark. Shacharut, Shacharit, which is from the word Shachar, which is dark. And then at the same time, it means dawn. So the explanation physically is that the darkest time of the night is right before dawn. And then comes dawn. So it's both dark and night and day. But what's the reason for that? Why is the darkest element of the night right before daybreak? It's because the work in the darkness creates the light. From the deepest darkness itself comes the greatest light. Why? Because in order to elevate the greatest darkness, it requires a more powerful light. So the highest miracle of all time was the miracle of Purim. Because it came into such a dark period of the end of exile. It was a very dark time, where the world felt so much that there's no God running it. Everything felt so abandoned to the rules of nature. A godless existence. And from that darkness came the light. Because when we don't lose our connection to God in that darkness, we dig into the depth of our soul and with our deepest faith and know that it cannot be that God has forsaken this existence. From that very, very deep core essential place is where we draw from God's essence, which that itself is the power to transform that most natural state and to suddenly illuminate it. It's not that the nature disappears. It's that very natural existence suddenly becomes so bright till you don't even see. You see God, but it's like the entire nature vaporizes into God, into godliness, while it's nature. That's the point. Without destroying anything, it's just Hashem. You're everywhere. From this darkness. And that's the story of Esther. Shachar. A second before, it's so black. A second later, it's so bright. And this takes me to one place. It takes me to the tunnels of Gaza. There's no darker place in the world than the tunnels of Gaza. Nothing is darker than the tunnels of Gaza. Secular, or what seemed to have been secular Jews, are dragged into the tunnels of Gaza, into the epitome of darkness. Jews who outwardly never said Shema Yisrael, Hear O Israel, never cared about Shabbos candles, never cared about Kiddush, never cared about tefillin. They were utterly secular. They spent a year or two in the tunnels of Gaza under the most inhuman, in the darkest possible existence possible. If there's ever a moment of the darkness before the light, it's that moment. It's that 2 years for these poor people. Hellish nightmare. And listen to them talking now. They are shining with such a light that the world has never seen since before creation. They talk about Shabbat. They talk about Kiddush. They talk about tefillin. They talk about Shema Yisrael. They're coming to their secular friends and saying, God is real. God is real. With such clarity, it's intrinsic. It's just from that darkness. Ayela such, and that's the Purim story. It's the Esther story. It's the Zichuch, and that's what refines the world for Mashiach. Going back to So what we're watching, what we will be seeing is what we were watching. We will see evil collapse. It's not going to happen through plagues coming from the sky, although God is doing things from behind the scenes without a question. There might be the most spectacular military offensive in all of history. Because with the advanced weapons that we have today, we might watch the most stunning thing, but the fact that a world that have for thousands of years persecuted the Jews are coming together to take down the last bit of evil that has been that is threatening the Jews. And when I say a world that has for thousands of years tormented the Jews, I don't need to remind anybody about all the protests that were happening all over American colleges just a year ago. If you want to know what kind of dislike there is to the Jewish people. And yet, the last force of darkness threatening the Jewish people is going to be removed, Bezrat Hashem, momentarily, in front of our eyes. By who? By the world. By the Achashverosh of our days. This is the story of Purim. And who's driving all of this? It's the tshuva, it's the Esther, it's these hostages, it's these heroes coming out from the dungeons of darkness. How do they discover God in such darkness? All there is darkness. God is hidden in the darkness. That's the Esther story. So we should all have a very happy Purim. We should celebrate like we've never celebrated. Let's see big miracles. And let the action begin. Mashiach now.